Gibraltar is blessed with a rich variety of natural and human history. The rock and the town below have been home to many cultures and people over the centuries. The artifacts, monuments and memories that remain become our heritage. And as Gibraltar moves forward and grows, it is up to us as a society to make sure this heritage endures and becomes a part of our future as well. The Upper Town is one of the most concentrated areas of history in Gibraltar. Its buildings, streets and alleyways have sheltered and built our community over the centuries. In recent decades, there has been a renewed interest in regeneration and renewal of the old town fabric. Urban renewal projects are increasingly successful in drawing families back to the old town into modernized buildings that retain the vernacular charm. But restoring the old town is not without its challenges. In 2019, we documented the beginning of a new development on Castle Road, Sylvian Suites, which, through considered planning and due diligence, has resulted in a project which has managed to balance the elements of restoration, logistics and economic viability.
The concept behind the development was to save the building. We spent almost a year trying to find the right engineering system, which we found by interviewing engineers from all over the world, to be able to save the building. So for a year, we did nothing, paid for scaffold, paid for costs, lost a lot of money. But we're very proud that that investment was worth it because, as you can see, we're refurbishing the old town, which is something we have to do in Gibraltar.
Project's advancing at some speed, as you can probably tell. There's 3 different blocks, the first 2 of which are largely complete and are just interior finishes that are being carried out. The third of which is just next to us, which is Block J as we refer to it, where structural intervention is still being carried out. But unlike the first 2 blocks, this one will not be receiving additional stories above, so it's going to be a much quicker turnaround than the previous ones. And yeah, the project's advancing at some pace. Finishes, etc. have been selected and there's a show flat that was carried out. And we're gearing up towards completing the project in the near future.
Well, we've had challenges with getting the concrete up here. We've had challenges in trying to get a crane because although the crane may seem like an eyesore, it does accelerate construction. And we appreciate that it's not been easy for people around us. There's some elderly residents who live around here and we've been building for 2.5 years. So we've tried to make it as quick as possible and as benign as construction can ever be. We've also had issues with storage. I mean, I think you've already looked at some of the areas we've had to borrow either from the Gibraltar government or from residents in order to be able to store materials because it is a very, very small site.
We have 2 factors that crop up in so many different projects that we do in the Upper Town, which is the challenge of logistics, so the limited amount of space that we have to work with. Here specifically, we have no direct street access, so we're sort of nestled between pedestrian thoroughfares which are stepped. That's one aspect, and the other is sort of building with neighbors in all different sides and trying to reutilize as much as possible the existing building stock. So in this project here specifically, the intervention, in order to make it economically viable for the project overall, needed us to not just refurbish the existing buildings but also add to it in volume, which posed a challenge because it was difficult structurally for that additional imposed load to be carried by an existing building, which has very minimal foundations to speak of. So the initial thought was quite an intrusive intervention which would have required piling into the terrain, which apart from anything was a challenge here in terms of just getting the equipment in place to be able to carry that out. So after much to and fro on that, what we ultimately had is these engineers, Tacones from Portugal, who assisted us. And they have come up with this solution, which is relatively widely used in a lot of different European countries, less so in Gibraltar, which is almost a straitjacket effect. So what we do is we keep the existing building fabric, we add a reinforcement layer on the outside of it, also on the inside in some locations, and projected concrete gets added on top of that. That gives the whole structure much greater rigidity and much greater load-bearing capacity, which meant that we were able to maintain the existing fabric without needing us to pile into the terrain and take on the load of the additional floors above. So it was a much quicker, less intrusive project, and critically also allowed us to keep much of the existing building fabric as it is, as opposed to having to do wholesale demolitions of the building.
It is an important project for development in the Old Town because it's the first time this technique has been used, and as we know is the nature of the Old Town, access, tight corridors, no vehicle access makes it difficult or complicated to get heavy machinery in for demolition and for carting away any of the rubble. So it was a really interesting one to follow, and it's really down to the dedication of the developers who went out and found a solution and brought this solution from Portugal to Gibraltar. The value of our built heritage environment, I think, spans many areas. There's the power of community and the power of the shared memory that binds communities together. And I think that's really important in linking generations. So shared spaces, shared buildings, shared memories and experiencing spaces. There's also the environmental side that goes into whether you're restoring a building and reusing a building, all that energy and material that's also gone into building that building is a shame to waste and cart away and throw it away and start again with new energy-hungry processes. You've also got the fact that we built very well in the past. These buildings, many of these are 300, 200 years old. What we're building today, I don't think that there are many kind of structures that we're building today that will be around in 100 or 200 years in such a state that it can easily be refurbished and put back together again and make a beautiful home or office or workspace or shop environment for a community. So I think there's lots of levels of value in our heritage, in our built heritage that surrounds us.
The principle of the project is trying to reutilize the existing building fabric. So we could easily have just said a wholesale demolition of all the existing buildings and build something new in its place, which undoubtedly space-wise would have been more efficient because we could have in essence designed it from scratch. But I think it's contrary to what the Old Town Guide is encouraging us to do in the Old Town generally. So we're trying to take buildings which were built many years ago for a different purpose, and we're trying to bring it up to modern living standards, and to do so, particularly to make it economically viable as well in a location such as this, poses certain challenges. So the benefit of the solution that has been implemented here is that we haven't had to get rid of a lot of the existing walls. Much of it is still there. We've obviously made interventions in terms of allowing the layouts to work as is foreseen for the subdivision of houses, which is different to what would have been here before. But it's recycling the existing building, if you will. So it's, I think it's a bonus from a heritage perspective. It's a bonus from not having to demolish and get rid of all these building stocks. And yeah, we're preserving some of our history in the process.
I try and do what's good for Gibraltar. I was born and raised here. I hope to retire here, pass away here, and raise my grandchildren here with my kids. So what I do, I feel, will always be held into account. And I think there is that feeling in Gibraltar that everything is about luxury housing. We have to refurbish the old. Otherwise, we do end up with loads of tower blocks because land is at a premium. We have to build. Can we build better? Can we build with an environmental focus in mind? Yes, the North Gorges just won the first ever sustainability prize. So as developers, we have to make sure that we take on board latest environmental considerations, and we try. And then when we don't want to, we have really good people like the Environment Department, like Heritage, you know, all the different stakeholders that work behind the DPC who keep us honest. At least they do me anyway, because I didn't demolish this building and spent a lot of money trying to save it.
Developing old building stock in and of itself represents a challenge. The challenge is that you're inheriting something which is not just a blank sheet of paper, but something that you have to work around. Oftentimes, when we take on a building, we don't know all the intricacies that are going to face us as the project develops. So here specifically, when we inherited these buildings, they were in such a poor state of dereliction that there had been all manner of piecemeal additions done to it over time, and also it had been used really as a dumping ground for the vicinity. So there were many areas that we had to be cleared up before we could even get a scale of what we had to work with. So that in itself, and without knowing how well the structure has maintained itself and whether there's asbestos in certain areas which may not be immediately apparent, is a challenge and it's a risk, and it's something that makes it developing in the Old Town something that not all developers perhaps pursue, because when you're building in a virgin site, if you will, outside of the city walls where you don't have those particularities to work with, you can advance without those incognitos that you face along the way.
Our view of the Old Town is you can't look at it on a piecemeal building by building basis. Although each building is important to the overall appearance and massing of Gibraltar's Old Town, which has developed organically over centuries. Ideally, we'd like to see an urban regeneration scheme. We've had them start in fits and starts, and catalyst projects such as Calle Comedia, Castle Street renovation, which took place about 15 years ago now, has sparked a regeneration of that area. We've had a number of buildings be refurbished. We've now got street art popping up in the area. We've got eating places like the Casbah, which had heritage awards, and you start to see the footfall coming up through the area through these little things which government invests in what we call a catalyst project, and then smaller private businesses and landlords follow suit, doing their own little bit and sprucing up the area. I think that is a method that we could use quite successfully in Gibraltar. The Arches is another major area that has been a catalyst project. We hoped to see cafeterias popping up. That didn't happen, but you do have the Gamper up there now. You've got 2 schools, and there's a lot of footfall. So hopefully some entrepreneur will see the viability of having something like that and just creating that variety of community activity.
History is in layers, isn't it? So it's not something that is a cast in stone moment of time that stays immovable. All these premises inevitably, as time progresses, as the owners change, as the requirements change, will get alterations done to them. So sometimes it's a case of understanding what is it that we think is important and that is emblematic about a premises that we want to maintain, and ensuring that you focus the attention on that front. But apart from anything, it's also a case of each project, and this is the exciting bit I think about the line of work that we're in, each project faces its own challenges and the buildings have their own merits. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to all locations. It's a case of understanding what we have to deal with and how we can best address it. And we do that as designers, we do that in consultation with the constructors who ultimately need to deliver on our vision, as well as the different stakeholders that form part of that process.
In a small place like Gibraltar, heritage is everywhere. We often take note of the beautiful old buildings and monuments around us, and are in awe of the magnificent labours of engineering that are evident around the rock. But some heritage you may just pass by on your day-to-day. Something as innocuous as a wall can have a story. In 2021, the Bund Wall on Europa Road would be demolished to facilitate a new development on the site of the old casino, which has brought renewed interest into this often overlooked part of Gibraltar and the Victorian water tanks it was built to protect.
The project at the ex-casino site, now known as the Reserve, has been going on for a few years. Throughout all this time, the Trust's focus has been on trying to preserve the water tanks, which are a large infrastructural tank underneath what was the then casino. We were successful in that, and its retention has influenced the way that the design for the building has gone ahead. We felt they were a very important part of our industrial heritage, and the developer, after due research and heritage assessments, concurred with us and have worked very hard to make sure that they are retained and kept usable within the wider range of the project.
In the 1840s, the military establishment decided that they wanted to quarry the entire area because they needed to essentially refortify all our defences across Gibraltar. Yeah? So that was the main concern at the time and why the site was used. That was in the 1840s. They soon realized that we had a massive problem with water supply, which is an issue that we've always had historically, and they wanted to build a tank. They built a southern tank in the 1850s. Then they built one in the 1860s, or we assume it was built in the 1860s because in 1866 the Sanitary Commission was established, right? By 1869 they thought that they were going to be able to provide fresh water because they discovered fresh water in the wells in the isthmus. And they even built a pumping station that was just removed fairly recently. Unfortunately, they soon realized that the water that they were pumping in was brackish water, so they couldn't use it for fresh water any longer. But brackish water can still be used to clean sewers and clean roads and clean general areas, and that was the first instance of dual water use in Gibraltar.
The tanks are a strategic part of the dockyard and being able to victual the British Navy or any visiting fleets when they came in. That was so critical to that effort that it was felt that they needed some protection should there be any enemy designs on taking them out as a facility.
In around 1879, 1880, technology advanced quickly with regards to naval technology. They soon realized that the water tanks were an easy target and could easily be targeted from sea and destroyed. So they built what we call the bund wall or the blast wall. When they built it between 1879 and 1880, what they wanted was to mimic the design of the limestone ashlar original wall that we have here, sort of like with pastiche elements. But it was, although it was heavy duty, it was sort of like built of concrete and random rubble. Essentially, they did that so that if it was going to be hit by any bombardments, it would essentially absorb the impact and wouldn't damage the tanks itself. And it never got bombarded, so we'll never know if it was built strong enough or not. The blast wall in the last couple of weeks have been removed, and now we can actually see the original wall, which is the first time we've seen it in the past 130 years. Why is it important? Why the need to safeguard it? Because they're Victorian in origin. It's significant in the establishment of dual use in water supply for the entire community, and it's something that could be showcased in the future. Right now, the tanks are still in use, but the idea is to decommission them in the future and for it to become a tourist site and attraction for the community at large.
So we have a tank at Europa Road, which is below where the old casino used to be, and it's basically a seawater reservoir or seawater tank. We pump seawater directly from the sea. It pumps to that reservoir, and that reservoir also has, as well as supplying an area of Gibraltar, it also pumps to other reservoirs, which also then supply to the population. It is also an important reservoir because it supplies the main firefighting source of water for the Upper Rock.
What was key to this project was that the tanks are still in use and very much in use by Aquagib. They supply salt water to the whole of the South District and also to the Upper Rock. And it was key that that access to them was retained and in a safe way. So they've been future-proofed in that sense, in that they can still be accessed safely for any maintenance that's needed and to continue to serve the community probably for another 100 years.
The ultimate aim is to be able to decommission the tanks inside because it's still full of water, and for the developer itself or whichever other party that's interested to be able to do something with the tanks inside.
And the ways spaces like this are repurposed is endless, you know, from libraries to spas to gyms to massive just event spaces, really it's open to the imagination. So we're confident that the approach taken to this project will allow this heritage asset to live on beyond even the lifespan of the residential buildings that will be built above it.
So the reserve's 97 apartments, and it's taken us around 15 years to actually get the final consents through, and that was for a number of reasons, but primarily just because there was a lot of consultation and negotiation with all of the stakeholders that have been involved, and for the good reasons that, you know, we're nestled between the nature reserve and the botanic gardens, and it's a really unique site. More importantly, when it comes to heritage as well, we've got two really good heritage assets beneath the site, which are the two historic tanks. And one of the things that we've been doing since we got consent has been demolishing the buttress wall, the bund wall that's protected those tanks, and it's basically made up of rubble. It had some pastiche limestone block work on the outside, which is actually brickwork.
We had a lot of conversation with the highways department because we felt that it was a wall that was historically significant, and we wanted it to be recorded and surveyed and photographed appropriately, right? From the outset, we only had permission for 1 weekend, and we thought that wasn't going to be enough, because what we didn't want is for the contractors to come in and just demolish the wall if it were just a random modern wall that you find somewhere in Europa Road. That's not what we envisaged. If we didn't think that it had any historical significance, we could easily have come in, demolished it in a few hours and got rid of it. But we were very concerned that if we went in without any due diligence and without any proper control, that it could not only affect the original wall and the original tanks that has the utmost historical significance, but also from the developer point of view. They're going to build trusses around it, and this is going to be their base, so we can't obviously go all in and destroy something that will affect their construction process and their development, and also affect what we then deem historically significant.
Now it's going to be a considerable amount of time excavating. You know, this work is not work that you can do quickly. So what we're doing is we're making sure that all of the safety precautions are made, and after all, we're uncovering the original ashlar limestone blockwork behind the bund wall. You know, something like this is so important for us because we know that wall is going to be the feature piece of our development. So we cannot be damaging that wall whilst we're doing this work, and that's the reason why we're in a third weekend of doing the works, which we will finish this weekend, but we didn't do within 2 weekends because we didn't want to take that risk.
And as you can see now, we've pretty much done a good job removing all of it, but we obviously have areas that we have to still remove and restore and patch up and obviously clean, because we need to showcase it as a beautiful historical site.
The perceptions for developers looking into other lobbies, and for other lobbies looking into developers, are often, I think, sort of entrenched. And as a developer, we always think that the perception is that the heritage lobby are here to stop us and prevent us from developing, and that's completely wrong. It's the wrong approach to take, and I think this development champions collaboration. So we've worked closely with the heritage teams and with government authorities to find the right solutions to a really tricky development, and you know, what we're trying to do now is build on those and make sure that people are aware that you can actually have successful negotiations between parties.
Whenever major projects come forward to DPC, the DPC is sort of the beginning of the end process in a way. There's a lot of unseen work that goes on before getting everything ready to a stage where it's presentable at DPC. From the trust point of view, we always want to engage as early as possible with applicants to talk through what their ideas are, put out any concerns that we might have so that they can be mitigated against as early as possible in the design. Once something gets to the DPC for wider consideration, it's normally gone through a lot of these filters. So what's presented is normally almost approvable or approvable with conditions, but the process isn't a linear one, it's cyclical, and sometimes applications can come before the DPC a number of times before they finally get the green light and satisfy or mitigate for all the potential issues that are flagged up, not just from heritage but from environment, technical services, the whole gamut of suppliers that are represented at the DPC.
You have compromise in every development, and this one's no different to that. So you've got situations where visual impact of the building has been an issue because of the fact that we're having to build above the heritage tanks, and that has created a lot of negotiation and consultation that had to take place across a number of months and years actually, so that we can reach the right sort of compromise to mean that we can preserve the tanks, we can preserve maintain their structural integrity, but we can also have a situation where we're limiting the visual impact of the building as much as we can, and also making the development viable at the same time.
It's quite important to note that the developer has done all their due diligence work. They've been on board with everything that we've asked from them. So what they needed to do first was a desk space assessment. And what I mean by a desk space assessment is a historical analysis of the importance of the site, the value of the site, and the mitigation measures that you need to put in place in order to safeguard the historical assets that you want to protect. And that's important because it has to be submitted to the planners and to the Development and Planning Commission, and then they take that on board and they decide if the site actually warrants enough importance to be protected or not.
One of the things that we're doing here is we're looking at essentially a load of barriers originally when we start this project, and it's been great over the period of the project to actually witness all of our teams as well beginning to realise that actually these barriers are turning into benefits. We're actually talking about things within a development that we can celebrate with the purchasers as well, and that's really good. That's really great.
Once all the building work is over, the wall will be cleaned up, it will have some feature lighting, there'll also be a pavement which will improve pedestrian safety and also allow for them to be appreciated. We
still need to undertake restoration works, and we still need to provide information panels all around. It's been a smooth process, obviously a lot of meetings and a lot of deliberation, but I'm quite happy with the work that we've done so far, and I'm keen to be able to finish it up and be able to showcase it to the community.